Welcome to Patagonia, the southern tip of the Americas. This place will completely blow away your ideas of mountains, weather, distance, water. Some of the rivers down here are so pure you can drink right out of the stream. And most share a kind of surreal blue color. When you see them, it opens up something pure and deep inside of you.
Otra forma de ser, otra forma de ver, otra forma de ser, otra forma de ser, otra forma de ver, otra forma de ser.
This was the scene in Santiago a few months before we headed down to Patagonia. People were pissed about Hydro sand.
So, I don't know what's going to happen with the dams. I do know if they do it, they're going to regret it for the rest of their lives because of what they'll have done to one of the really most beautiful parts of Chile. Chile's blessed with a lot of beautiful landscapes, but this is one of the most spectacular.
A few months later, I met up in Santiago with my friend Adam French, a conservation scholar and mountaineer, and Claudio Vicuña, a Chilean photographer and climber. And we were on the total mission to make it down to the future Patagonia National Park. The goal was to meet up with Kris and Doug and to talk to folks along the way about the rivers, the dams, the future of Patagonia, their connection with the place. We were inspired by Doug Tompkins' original journey down from Ventura, California to Patagonia in 1968 with Yvon Chouinard, where they climbed and surfed the entire way.
The big idea of protecting key areas in perpetuity is just essential to civilization. And the way you know that is you take those out of the human story and see what you have left.
Many people I know really thinking deeply about environmental ethics are trying to find a center line for the kind of actions that we take in daily life or in the work that we do. The work that I'm interested in doing is influencing others too. I mean, that's what activism is about.
Day 2, we pushed out of Pucón too early. International hub for whitewater paddlers and just such a cool town. We continued on to Puerto Montt. Our ship, the Amadeo, was a ferry used by long-haul truck drivers to get down into the Carretera Austral, or the Southern Highway. We've been packing, unpacking, and traveling so hard, it all just started to blur together that night.
In 1965, I met Yvon Chouinard, who was a climber and made technical rock and ice climbing equipment at that point. he rented the beach house next to my family's beach house. And so at 15, I met this very unusual person. I was supposed to go away to boarding school for high school, but I didn't want to go. I threatened to run away if they sent me to boarding school. So I stayed in our little town and went to the world's shittiest high school. But in parallel to this, I had this other world, which was Yvon Chouinard and all these climbers, painters that hung out at the beach. And so that's how I got into that story.
Really, right? San Francisco is the center of it all. And, I start the North Face in 1963, or the California Mountaineering Guide Service in 63 with an adjunct at the end of it, of the North Face, at the end of 63. And by 1964, the North Face is going strong.
The next morning was definitely a bit foreboding out there. Overnight, we passed Corcovado National Park and Pumalin Park. These are the Tompkins' first successfully completed conservation projects in Chile. And yet the Tompkins remained controversial figures down here. At the time, people didn't understand why they were buying huge chunks of land as private individuals. The concept of converting it to parkland and giving it back to the people as a national park just didn't exist then. Now we were entering an otherworldly terrain of huge fjords and mountains called the Canal Moraleda.
So I was bemoaning the fact to Yvon that no one wanted to hire me, but I had no skills whatsoever. Now I'm 18, 19 years old. So he said, oh, come and work for me. And so I did for $2 an hour in the summers. And that's how I got into Chouinard equipment. That was what it was called then. And then about 2 years into that, Yvon said, I think we could make some clothes for all of us to climb in and, whatever. So then we started making these weird jackets and double-seated shorts and Chamonix guide sweaters, which were just modeled after the Chamonix guide sweaters. And that's how we started Patagonia.
At 9 a.m., we started driving from Puerto Chacabuco onto the Carretera Austral. The terrain was amazing. Wildflowers, lupines, and these steep forested river gorges along the Rio Simpson, all in a steady cold rain.
Right here to the left or to the right? Nice. Laguna Chihuahua. Right by that lake. Let's go look. 1,000, you guys paid 2,000.
You're supposed to have a beer in hand.
Damn, you're right.
Try doing this in a 100-mile-an-hour wind on the side of a mountain.
We camped that evening at National Reserve Cerro Castillo. After being in constant motion and noise, this forest felt so quiet. A perfect campsite in Patagonia, and nobody else around.
Yeah, by 1985, I started to realize that it was the craft that I was interested in. And what I was doing, if I examined that another layer below, was making a lot of stuff that nobody needed. And producing excess consumption and creating desires for this consumption. That's what we're very good at as a craft. Right. And I was looking at my own, work or my own daily activities from the point of view of the craft, but not looking at the substance of it, you see, which was producing a lot of excess stuff, you see. Then I realized that I was on the wrong side of the equation. I needed to just personally needed to be working on something, a little more transcendental.
We spent a lot of time in the mountains and at the sea, and I think if you fall in love with those places, you want to protect them.
The brew is on.
We broke camp slowly that morning, lingering in this rainy and yet beautiful place.
What was it you had just said about what's
Later in the morning, we were met by a park ranger named Luis Montesino.
La vocación de esta región tiene que ser el turismo. Forestal ya no, porque se eliminó todo el bosque nativo.
Claro,
ya,
sí, se
ya
corta
terminó.
el
Sí, los estudios decían que podríamos haber sido una potencia como en Canadá en cuanto a la producción maderera, pero se quemó todo el bosque de lenga, que es el lenga.
Sí.
Entonces ya no, ni tampoco perdió su vocación maderera. Entonces tiene que ser el turismo.
Sueño en la idea, hombre, sueño en mi verdad. No tengo paciencia para la mierda que no me deja en paz. Lucho por la idea, mujer, lucho por justicia y paz. Lucho por amor y compasión.
As we drove on through the Aysén province, there were signs everywhere. It was in your face.
Using biodiversity and the idea that you share the planet with other creatures, to me, is the baseline upon which we try to develop an environmental ethic. And as I say, to get to that point where you really say, to share the planet with other creatures it is a faith in God type thing. It's different. I'm just using that as a metaphor. But when you ask somebody that believes in God, they tell you they believe in God because they have faith in that. I don't happen to believe in God, but I believe that we have to share the planet with other creatures in the same way that somebody believes that they believe in God.
This is like the headwaters section.
And then after all that travel, suddenly we were there. To get to the future Patagonia National Park, we had to go right by the Rio Bacar. When you see a river, it's always on the river's terms. The river always seems to give you something unique in that moment. On this day, there was a lone condor circling overhead. Just a few kilometers downstream was one of the proposed sites for the Aysén dams.
That started the acquiring of other properties, and we finally made that. And I finally managed to buy the 190,000 hectares, and we had a real park on our hands. And over the years, we ran that up to about 300 and some thousand hectares, and that's Pumalin Park today. And we're at the point now where we'd like to turn that over to the Chilean government to make a national park, which was my idea in the beginning. I like the idea that these big pieces of property become national parks. It shouldn't be in the hands of private people. So we were just sort of the, interim caretaker of this property.
Well, I mean, we come from the States where we love national parks. When you go into Yellowstone National Park, you cross under that big arc at the entrance. That's my park. And that's your park. And that's yours. And these are our parks. These are our lands. And in our case, the Chileans and Argentines are going to feel the same way. They walk into this park 100 years from now, this is our park. This is our conservation story.
The next morning, we hiked up into the mountains on a trail called the Lagunas Altas.
Hemos subido como 300 metros.
Nada más.
Soy Luis Solís. Estoy a cargo del programa de construcción de senderos en el parque. Usamos senderos de gauchos, de recorridos de ovejeros antiguos. Y dentro de eso hemos ido cambiando ciertas áreas para hacerla llegar al sendero perfecto.
One of the best moments was getting to share some mates with Luigi and his trail crew high up in the mountains.
Que ellos culturalmente usan lo que usaban los antiguos, los gauchos viejos. Una ruca con nylon y duermen en carpa, eso es diferente. Pero antes dormían así nomás. Pieles de oveja y guanaco y todo. Ahora ya con saco de dormir, un poco más técnico, pero no se pierde lo que culturalmente iniciaron en su familia. Pero ya es sacrificado. Pocas veces se valora eso. Para ustedes, wow, qué bonito, es muy lindo. Pero para ellos es su vida y ellos generan ingresos para su familia a través de este tipo de trabajo.
In some ways, the conversion of original lands to production is happening so fast that land conservation, the creating of national parks, is sort of a desperate strategy, because you just, as quickly as you can, try to institutionalize the protection of key habitat. You also, in our case, we are trying to create a new economic base where we're working so that the communities surrounding these places benefit. Because if you look at conservation, you know, let's just say kind of short term, which short term for me is 100 years, say 150 years, 200 years, you can't hope to think that these conservation areas will continue to be protected unless the people surrounding them benefit from them. And it's clearly a benefit.
Day 8, leaving day. We really needed more time just to get to know the volunteers and to hang out with everybody.
You can feel the heart of the project anywhere you go here, because the guanacos are back in the valley and the foxes are back in the valley, and you can see the flamingos out in the lakes, and no matter where you go, you can feel how it's re-energizing, which is, I think, really special.
We said our quick goodbyes and then headed out from the park, crossing over into Argentina via the Paso de Bajos. There were these huge windswept tablelands, just an epic open landscape.
Change with the times, letting time change me. I need to breathe to be alive, but I'm alive because I'll breathe. Give up, get up, sit down, don't leave. Rather be and not have it, have it not be. Slowly going to a place in space. Take it or leave it if you need what you take. Solid nothing or nothing at all. Live or die, stand and fall to allow.
And then we managed to get the Chilean president, Ricardo Lagos, interested in putting in government land around it and form a national park. And so we made Corcovado National Park, which was really it's a sensational park. That was about 2005 when that was inaugurated. And so we've been just, chipping away, trying to make more national parks. We have a lot of, property, 450,000 hectares here in Chile still, that we'd like to get into really 3 new national parks and expand 4 others. And we're working on that now. But ultimately, we'll give away all that we have. I mean, we're not taking them with us. So.
And then finally, it just got really quiet and empty out there on the Pan American Highway, driving all day and into the night. and just throwing down our sleeping bags off the side of the road near El Ocho, Argentina.
Miles de voces y conversaciones de amor y temores corren por mi cabeza y el veneno que me mantiene en el suelo me quita empeño, va en contra de mi naturaleza.
In Monteleone, for example, I'm so happy with that because people go to visit Monteleone National Park today. They don't hear about a Tompkins. They don't hear about how that park was formed. It's their park. So for me, that's a 10. We're going to leave here one day, not in the too distant future, and we'll just disappear. And that's good.
In the morning, we broke camp and quickly got back on the road, stopping finally for a last round of beers in El Bolson to call it a trip. This was the biggest trip of my life. And to be honest, I wasn't sure how to tell the story. I only knew that it started with the desire to see a river and led to all of these questions and ideas about how different people saw the world. I didn't even know what we would call it, but then along the way I learned a word that the original inhabitants of this land used for a confluence, a coming together of rivers, a sacred place that shouldn't be disturbed. They called it Trawen.
Yo soy como un árbol sin mis raíces, yo no puedo crecer. Y en cierto sentido lo que yo he vivido refleja mi forma de ser. Yo no quiero vivir olvidando el pasado ni esperando. No te voy a mentir, tú bien sabes, las cosas se van cambiando. Las cosas se van cambiando, las cosas se van cambiando, las cosas se van cambiando. Las cosas se van cambiando, las cosas se van cambiando, las cosas se van cambiando. I never had it too rough as a child growing up. Clothes on my back, a roof up top, food in my cut. Always shining up the shadow of papi, my soul bottle. I'm grateful for mama with a positive role model. Ancianos cercanos me enseñaron que la vida es bella. Give thanks to mama Nina, gran patulo en Tacalle. Yeah, all the love you gave us and continue to give us. I was never taught religion, but the spirit lies within us. Someone taught religion and the spirit lies within them. To a caution, evil walks in every individual. Good and bad is never set in stone. With a pathetic soul, it's like the kills innocent, claiming he's evangelical. Read between the lines in his corporate.